Hello, and thank you for joining today's session on Enabling Conservation Planning with GIS, a vision for 30 by 30 at the 2021 ESRI International Users Conference. I'm David Gadsden, Director of Conservation Solutions, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Ryan Perkle, Green Infrastructure Lead and Principal Consultant for Environment and Geodesign, Sunny Fleming, National Solution Engineer for State Environment, and Daniel Martin, Consultant and Project Manager for Environment and Geodesign. Our agenda for the session today is to first begin with some background on 30 by 30 that will hopefully provide some helpful context for the rest of the presentation. Ryan Perkle will provide an overview of process fundamentals and available resources supporting 30 by 30 efforts, followed by Sunny Fleming, who will showcase a number of organizations already working on 30 by 30 and related programs. Daniel Martin will then take a deeper dive into the efforts of the state of California to achieve the 30 by 30 targets. Let's start with a brief overview and background on 30 by 30. As we all know, our world is facing incredible challenges. The advancing threat of climate change, coupled with widespread modifications to the Earth's surface, supporting a human population now approaching 8 billion, has simply left little space for nature. Experts estimate that since 1970, populations of many species have declined nearly 70%, and in some regions even further. The accelerating global disruption to natural systems driven by climate change threatens not only further loss of species, but the ecosystem services which are essential for human well-being, including our food systems, clean air, and water. Clearly, a comprehensive and more integrated approach is needed to address these multifaceted and compounding challenges. 30 by 30 is an emerging movement to conserve 30% of land and waters by the year 2030. It aims to provide space for nature, to offer room for adaptation and survival under the increasing pressure of climate change, while at the same time working towards a more sustainable and equitable approach to managing our natural world and our natural resources. It should be noted that many organizations and individuals have been working tirelessly to advance the 30 by 30 agenda, including the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation and the Half Earth Project, National Geographic Society, the Weiss Foundation, and many others. Commitments to 30 by 30 continue to advance rapidly around the globe. For example, the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People is an intergovernmental group of more than 60 countries, co-chaired by Costa Rica and France, with the UK serving as a co-chair on oceans. The coalition is advancing a global deal for nature and people that can halt the accelerating loss of species and protect vital ecosystems that are the source of our economic security. In November of 2020, an executive order from the governor of California committed that state to a path to 30 by 30, which we'll explore in more detail later in the presentation. In January of this year, the Biden-Harris administration committed to working towards 30 by 30 as an aspect of the administration's plan to tackle the climate crisis. This plan calls for a voluntary and regional approach to 30 by 30, engaging a wide array of stakeholders to advise lasting conservation management outcomes. While nuances exist across these commitments, each aims to stop the halting loss of species now underway and improve nature's and our resilience to the climate crisis. Furthermore, these commitments propose approaches to reaching 30 by 30 targets that does not put an additional burden on under-resourced and marginalized communities. Of particular significance is the growing understanding of the importance of indigenous communities in the global and local conservation dialogues, and the value of incorporating traditional ecological knowledge in working towards sustainable conservation outcomes. At ESRI, we're committed to supporting our users working towards 30 by 30. At this early stage, we're both learning and contributing to this and other related initiatives. Based on our findings at this stage, it's our belief that a geospatial infrastructure is required to support 30 by 30 at all levels of geography. That infrastructure can provide key capabilities for both understanding and engagement. A geographic information system provides the organizational framework to assemble and integrate diverse content, creating a type of digital twin of the project area. That GIS is underpinned by the best available spatial reference data from authoritative providers from around the world and enhanced with localized content from each participating geography. This dynamic and evolving spatial data repository powered by GIS enables a wide array of conservation planning applications, which in turn power open data access, communications, engagement, and outreach apps for engaging stakeholders in the 30 by 30 process. We're finding, for example, that story maps are extremely valuable in conveying the many dynamic aspects of a 30 by 30 process. ArcGIS provides a scalable and tested geospatial infrastructure for 30 by 30. Its strengths and capabilities as a system of record, insight, and engagement naturally apply to the process of evaluating potential conservation actions, constraints, and communicating opportunities based on the best available data and guided by the best available science. However, as we all know, technology alone is never a complete solution. Allow me to pass the presentation to my colleague Ryan Perkle, who will share his insights on the process and resources available to support your 30 by 30 and related programs. Ryan, please take it away.
Thanks, David. And hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Perkle, and I'll be sharing a brief overview of ESRI's resources that are available to you in supporting your green infrastructure, conservation, and 30 by 30 planning efforts. So let's take a look at some resources we've assembled to help. As part of a collaborative partnership with the Green Infrastructure Center out of Charlottesville, Virginia, ESRI's GI initiative is a collection of freely available authoritative geospatial resources, newly generated data, online applications, and downloadable models. These resources were created to help initiate a national vision for GI planning and to empower and equip local organizations with the tools to support their GI, conservation, and 30 by 30 decision-making efforts. The first piece of the initiative is ESRI's derived data. These data consist of what we call habitat cores and other complementary data sets, including landscape connectivity. Think of these as being the foundational building blocks of a GI, conservation, or 30 by 30 plan. You'll see some of these data in just a few moments. Second, ESRI has compiled some of the most relevant environmental data sets available from other authoritative sources, such as the federal government, and made it easily accessible on the Living Atlas. The purpose here is to ensure that you spend less time looking for data and more time doing your meaningful work. Third, we've made the models that we use to generate our national data sets freely available so that you can further customize them to derive new versions of the data based on your needs. And for our friends across the globe, these models can be the starting point for you to create similar content in your home countries. And finally, we've compiled a series of freely available web apps that can be used to derive stakeholder engagement and identify GI assets of value. I'll also show several of these in just a few moments. So ESRI partnered with the GIC to develop these resources because they have decades of experience in helping communities to identify, plan for, and protect their most valuable natural assets. They've also honed a repeatable methodology that, when coupled with ArcGIS, can significantly advance this work. The first step is community goal setting, or the articulation of what the community aims to achieve with their GI, conservation, or 30 by 30 planning efforts. The second step involves data review, or the identification of geospatial information to help them achieve their goals. Step 3 involves mapping your assets. Think of this as the environmental inventory. Or put another way, if you don't know where something is, you can't protect it. Fourth, the process aims to assess various risks that may be exerted on those assets. And this is critical in helping you to understand where your efforts may be most urgently needed. Fifth, the process focuses on developing opportunities. I liken this to plan making, whereby the blueprints of what you aim to achieve are represented by maps and planning documents. And finally, implementation, whereby you put your plan into action and monitor and manage it for success over time. So we like to summarize this process into 3 general areas. They include developing an understanding of your region, actively planning to achieve your conservation targets, and taking action to make your plans a reality. And these 3 areas are really important because they're representative of patterns we see in practice and examples that we'll share with you later on in our talk. So with the remainder of my time, I'd like to demo some of the data and apps that you may find useful in your work. First, we'll get you connected with where to find these data. Next, we'll explore some of the data online. And finally, we'll fire up some apps to help with the mapping and exploration part of this process. So now I've transitioned to a web browser, and this is ESRI's Green Infrastructure website. I encourage you to check it out at your own pace, but right now I'd like to call your attention to the resources page where you can access much of the content we're going to show here today as part of these data carousels and other app viewers. Alternatively, you can also access the content directly from Living Atlas by typing in Green Infrastructure in the search bar and clicking Search. Once the results load, you can pan identify data galleries, applications galleries, as well as individual feature services and other data sets that you can access. We'll start by taking a look at intact habitat cores by opening the Items page. Once open, you'll notice that it's a complete description of how this dataset was created, as well as other source and metadata information. You'll also notice in the upper right, you have the ability to access the data via download for desktop and opening it in an online viewer, which we're going to do next. So now I've opened my map and I've added several other green infrastructure layers that we'll take a look at. But let's start with the habitat cores data depicted here in green. Habitat cores represent areas of natural land cover that are at least 100 acres in size and 200 meters wide. For the continental US, there are approximately 560,000 of these unique polygons distributed throughout the country. 90% of them are less than 3,000 acres in size. 50% of them are less than 500 acres in size. Let's zoom in to the St. Louis region to give this all a closer look. Now these cores represent the last remaining large intact areas found throughout the United States. They represent essentially the foundational building blocks for any green infrastructure, conservation, or 30-30 effort. Now, in addition to the footprints of these individual assets, there's also critical attribution that's found within each of them that essentially describes the landscape characteristics or the landscape's anatomy that's found within each of these features. And that's really critical in identifying conservation resources that we might be interested in protecting. Next, let's take a look at landscape fragments. Landscape fragments are like cores in that they represent areas of natural land cover, but that are smaller than the minimum size requirements needed to become a core. Now, these areas may also be candidate areas for conservation, especially in highly transformed landscapes where few cores remain. Now, the conservation paradigm of the 21st century really moves beyond the protection of isolated islands of habitat. Instead, it focuses on landscape connectivity, or the facilitation of species movement amongst these isolated remaining islands of habitat. So to better understand landscape connectivity, we modeled possible paths of wildlife movement amongst these habitat cores, and here are our results. Depicted by these orange lines, this layer represents the modeled least cost paths amongst neighboring cores. This analysis resulted in about 1.5 million connections traversing the continental United States. These connections depict the most efficient route between neighboring areas, and by extension, represent possible paths of wildlife movement. Now, in order to model these connections, you also need a cost or permeability surface upon which to actually conduct the analysis. That's represented here. The habitat cost surface reflects the relative ease of movement for terrestrial species across the landscape, taking into account multiple factors. Areas conducive to movement are shown in green. Conversely, areas in red are more difficult to traverse. These represent highly developed landscapes that are less conducive to species movement. So next, I'd like to show you a map of the United States that I bet you haven't seen before. Here, we're again looking at our national database of large intact landscape cores, and now we're going to prioritize it based on connectivity importance. This map depicts all of those areas based on their connectivity importance, or the number of those least cost paths that flow through each habitat core. Cores depicted in darker green have more of those paths flowing through them. So all else being equal, those might be locations that we would consider for prioritizing our conservation efforts, if something like connectivity was important to us. So with that, I really encourage everyone to take a look at these data on ArcGIS Online, the Living Atlas, and explore this information for yourself. So the last thing I'll show you is a really snazzy web app that will help us explore the prioritization of those cores that we might consider for conservation. Here again, we'll see our national database of intact habitat cores. Next, I'll open the calculator, and we'll be able to weight certain attributes based on their importance to us. So first, I'm going to select a default that prioritizes forest characteristics over others. You'll notice that the map instantly redraws, now emphasizing forested areas in darker green. This is to say that these areas contain the characteristics that might be most important to us if our primary focus is to conserve forests. Alternatively, we can look at another default parameter, such as wetlands. We'll apply this, and again, you notice that the map instantly redraws to now show us those locations that are the most rich in those resources. So I'm going to go ahead and reset, and we're going to pop back into the St. Louis region. So we know that cores have vastly different characteristics, and our challenge is often to identify the ones that contain the things we'd like to protect. So here, let's emphasize biodiversity importance. I'm going to come to my calculators once again, and I'm going to activate MOBI, a data set that Sunny will talk about in just a little bit. I'll apply this analysis, and now we watch the map light up. These areas in darker green represent cores that have the greatest biodiversity characteristics in this region. Let's add another variable like wetlands. Make it roughly equal weight. I will apply it. And again, my map now redraws to illustrate the locations that have the good combination of both biodiversity and wetland characteristics. So this is incredibly powerful analysis that's providing us with invaluable insights about the areas we might consider protecting. All right. So with that, if you're interested in learning more about this information, please feel free to reach out via email or simply search Green Infrastructure in the conference agenda to look up our other great session. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Sunny for some more great examples of conservation in action. Sunny, take it away.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm Sunny Fleming, ESRI's National Solution Engineer supporting state environmental agencies. The 30 by 30 vision is not necessarily new to any of us that work in conservation or related roles. Much of the work that the conservation community conducts, whether you're federal, state or local government, tribal nations, nonprofits, academics, or community activists, you're aware that GIS is an essential tool for achieving conservation goals. The examples on this slide are just a small handful of many thousands of examples of our users leveraging ESRI's geospatial infrastructure to meet a wide variety of needs. Regardless of whether we're using the terms green infrastructure, conservation planning, or 30 by 30, these frameworks all boil down to our core needs to understand, plan, and act. Today, we want to highlight just a few of the many examples of how government agencies, nonprofits, students, and citizens are working to understand the challenges we face, plan and prioritize how to address those challenges, and inspire action and monitor our progress. In addition to housing the green infrastructure tools Ryan discussed, ESRI's Living Atlas is a dynamic repository that thrives on authoritative datasets registered by contributing partners and ESRI. In order to achieve any goal, it's always necessary to understand our current situation. To that end, numerous agencies and partners are publishing to and leveraging content from ESRI's Living Atlas, the foremost collection of authoritative, curated geographic information and content. With over 9,000 items to explore online, from layers, maps, apps, and more, we could spend an entire UC going over it all. Instead, here are a few examples that help us understand and kickstart our 30 by 30 efforts. The U.S. Forest Service is just one of many contributing partners to ESRI's Living Atlas. One example dataset they provide is this one, modeling wildfire hazard potential. Anyone can view this dataset and bring this into their own work to enrich their story and understand the wildfire threats their community faces. In addition to understanding various threats, including wildfire, the 30 by 30 initiative will require inputs about Earth's biodiversity as well, to understand where sensitive habitats occur and where imperiled species occur. These data can be highly sensitive and localized. This is why NatureServe, in partnership with ESRI, has published a suite of datasets that explore global biodiversity for public use. These datasets are the products of MOBI, or the Map of Biodiversity Importance, a collaborative effort to identify the places most important for conserving at-risk species. The resulting datasets are available in ESRI's Living Atlas for everyone to use, and can be pulled into your own web maps or into ArcGIS Pro, as standalone data or inputs to other analyses such as with Suitability Modeler. Developing conservation targets is a multifaceted and complex issue. In addition to hosting authoritative datasets, the Living Atlas team here at ESRI helps provide focused applications or enriched datasets to understand the relationships between these complexities. This story map in Living Atlas explores the USGS protected areas of the US database, or PAD-US, breaking down the different definitions of land protections, and can help facilitate discussions with stakeholders when defining 30 by 30 conservation efforts. Here, this dataset brings together ESRI's demographic data and NASA air quality data to better understand environmental inequities through time and communicate the impacts of environmental injustices, just one of many considerations when planning for 30 by 30. The Living Atlas, combined with your own authoritative data and ESRI's geospatial infrastructure, facilitate all the components of understanding the status of 30 by 30 in your own area of interest. This in turn sets you up to effectively plan your conservation targets to meet your goals. Successful planning of 30 by 30 initiatives will require input from all perspectives, and sometimes these perspectives may feel incompatible. ESRI's geospatial infrastructure helps give voice to perspective and brings these together in harmony for the best possible outcomes. Let's explore some examples. The National Audubon Society is leveraging ESRI's story maps to bring clarity to the importance of including data on migratory bird routes in policy and decision-making. Historically, big game migration or plant biodiversity have been the easiest data sets to track and include. Audubon recognizes the importance of including avian datasets in planning and decision-making. In their story map, we can see the relationship between areas of global avian importance in red, state avian importance in green, overlapped with big game migration routes in purple. Bringing these perspectives together allows the Audubon to facilitate more holistic conservation models inclusive of bird populations and brings the concept to life for all stakeholders via ESRI story maps. The Nature Conservancy recognized that scientifically informed conservation planning can be a major and complex challenge, especially as we consider the effects of climate change on conserved areas. To tackle that challenge, TNC set out to develop a tool to assist in resilient conservation planning. Funded by the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation and leveraging publicly available data sets, TNC modeled a resiliency score across the contiguous lower 48 states and parts of Canada. The resiliency score allows stakeholders to examine their own potential conservation targets against the ability to protect biodiversity and maintain biodiversity corridors now and into the future, even in the face of climate change. The public, tribal nations, government agencies, and even other nonprofits can use this planning tool to identify new conservation priorities or score existing targets. Having this tool available to all stakeholders means that everyone can see at a glance how and why certain decisions are made and provide everyone with the confidence that these decisions will uphold 30 by 30 goals resiliently. Other entities have taken a similar approach to aligning stakeholder perspectives with data and focused tools to achieve working collaboration on setting conservation goals. Take the Montana Forest Action Plan as an example. Every state is tasked with developing a forest action plan every 10 years as a prerequisite of eligibility for certain federal funds. A lot can change in 10 years. Historically, Montana published PDFs outlining their forest action plan. These PDFs would be linked on their website, buried, deep, and difficult to find. Wading through the PDF to find information was laborious, and extracting that information for other purposes was impossible. Making iterative changes to the plan as needs changed over time was equally difficult. As 2020 planning began, Montana decided they wanted a more collaborative approach and a way to ensure their plan remained relevant as scientific understanding changed over time. Montana's Department of Natural Resources and Conservation was the principal agency responsible for developing the plan. They had previous experience developing focused tools, and they knew that leveraging ArcGIS Hub to wrap context around those tools was the way to go, to fully engage and collaborate on the topic as the Forest Action Plan was developed. Using ArcGIS Hub, they were able to manage relevant content and data, provide these as standalone products, or incorporate it into focused tools like dashboards and story maps, serve out relevant non-spatial documents, and allow others to contribute their own data sets and perspectives. Montana DCNR staff, as well as Forest Action Plan committee members, were able to log into the hub and use tools such as Survey 123 to comment or provide feedback. The public, too, were also able to come to the hub and find relevant data sets, story maps, and dashboards outlining the plan as it unfolded, and provide the department and committee with their own feedback and perspectives. Leveraging Hub allowed them to present very technical and scientific data in terms that were easier to understand, and with context that explained them clearly. This enabled them to reduce any friction between stakeholders, address public concerns or requirements, and democratize and make accessible tools that can otherwise be overwhelming to use. They were then able to use ArcGIS story maps to communicate the plan's various goals and initiatives for Montana's forest conservation goals. Whether you're working on a forest action plan, state wildlife action plan, comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, or 30 by 30 plans, the same pattern is required in order to achieve your goals. Montana sets a great example of truly embracing ESRI's geospatial infrastructure to develop sound, relevant, and sustainable conservation plans. A major struggle in conservation is how to distill down such large and overwhelming topics into actionable steps and to empower all citizens to be agents of change. While conservation targets are a major goal of 30 by 30, we also need to ensure that positive action is taken in our existing urban landscapes, as well as championing for conservation-minded policy in areas where development pressures threaten ecosystem health. When one Los Angeles City school read some recent research linking the lingering effects of inequitable redlining policies from the past to current heat islands and environmental inequities of the present, the students came together to explore the data spatially and drive action to address it in their own neighborhoods. They knew that planting more trees in areas that experienced higher levels of heat would lower air pollution, temperatures, stress levels, and reduce energy use required to cool houses. Additionally, they make for a better quality of life for residents through beautification, and studies have shown increases to business revenue and even reduction in mental health issues. The students were trained through California State University, funded by a National Science Foundation grant. They were able to leverage data from ESRI's Living Atlas, as well as authoritative data that the City of Los Angeles hosts on their ArcGIS hub. The results of their analyses targeted areas most in need of tree planting, which nonprofits were able to then use to set up tree planting events in those areas. Knowing where the priorities were allowed everyone to focus their resources, identify areas of opportunity, and effectively plan and take real action on an issue that directly affected their lives. ESRI's geospatial infrastructure provided the ecosystem the students needed to find the right data, complete the analyses, communicate the results, plan the events, and monitor the success. The patterns we see in this example are relevant to all conservation planning programs to inform management policies and best practices. In Peru, housing demands are driving illegal land grabs and increased developmental pressures up into the sensitive Lomas ecosystem, home to an ephemerally green and foggy landscape that appears desert-like once the fog lifts. Most of nearby Lima's population wasn't even aware of the region or how special it was. Assuming it was just a desert, there were few voices fighting for its conservation. Separate from environmental concerns, the land here is unsafe for development, prone to earthquakes, and known for its sweltering humidity, which can trigger health issues. Awareness was the first issue that a community of activists needed to address. Using ESRI's geospatial infrastructure, they built a geoportal that allowed anyone to explore a collection of maps and apps that revealed what was hidden in the fog. Then, they needed a way to allow local experts to collect data and observations in the region. Using tools like ArcGIS Survey 123, botanists and environmental leaders were able to catalog and inventory the biodiversity of the region. As these data all came together, they needed a way for everyone to conduct their own analyses and explore these data sets together. Beginning with just one web app to explore the data, the tools have now blossomed into numerous applications that engage stakeholders, including the community, organizations, municipality workers, and others, to ask detailed questions and get answers. They were then able to publicize this work and continue advocating for protection of the region using ArcGIS story maps. As the project gained traction, volunteers began contributing other data such as archaeological sites, potential ecotourism attractions, and other alternative low or no impact uses of the landscape. ESRI's geospatial infrastructure allowed the community to rally around an alternative vision for spurring both economic and conservation action in the region. With these data sets, an energized community, an alternative vision for economic success driven by conservation, the details gathered by the project resulted in the formal designation of at least 5 oases throughout the ecosystem that now make up the Sistema de Lomas de Lima. This is truly exemplary work, highlighting the spirit of 30 by 30 efforts and the ongoing conservation efforts we are all a part of and continue to be a part of. These examples highlight just a few ways organizations are using ESRI's geospatial infrastructure to achieve their conservation goals. The real story here, though, is that everyone has a role to play, and ESRI's geospatial infrastructure is the tool of choice for all aspects of conservation, from understanding our world to planning conservation targets and implementing these for positive outcomes for all. These examples come from government agencies, nonprofits, students, and citizens. They bring voice to our planet and to those most underserved to actualize the necessary components required for achieving the 30 by 30 vision. Now, let's take a deep dive with Daniel on how one group is really bringing the 30 by 30 vision to life with their efforts. Daniel?
Thank you, Sunny. So many great examples of how GIS can support green infrastructure, conservation, and 30 by 30 goals and processes. As Sunny said, my name is Daniel Martin, and I'm a consultant and project manager on the Environment and Geodesign team in ESRI Professional Services. I have the honor of serving as the project manager for CA Nature, and am excited to share with everyone a bit more detail about the project vision, strategy, and progress so far. First off, California 30 by 30 was initiated in October of 2020 with an executive order from the governor. While broadly sweeping in its scope, elements related to 30 by 30 included creating a baseline assessment of California's biodiversity that builds upon existing data and information, utilizes best available science and traditional ecological knowledge, and can be updated over time. It also stressed the need to inventory current biodiversity efforts across all sectors and land managers, and to highlight opportunities for additional action. Further, it directed governments to engage stakeholders across California's diverse communities with the goal of creating a process to strategically prioritize investments and focus on high-priority actions that promote biodiversity protection, habitat restoration, wildfire resiliency, and promote sustainably managed landscapes and other conservation outcomes. Our efforts will help them do just that. So in order to reach the 30% target, we must first understand where we are today. Here's a hypothetical example of what we mean. The map on the left depicts the Protected Areas Database of the US, or PAD-US, the same data Sunny showed earlier. Areas of green depict lands that are part of the database. At first glance, one might get the impression that we've already achieved our target. In fact, about 50% of California is included, but all protected areas are not created equal. PAD-US ranks areas by their level of protection or how restrictive activities on those lands can be. If we focus only on lands that have an expressed mandate for the protection of biodiversity, represented as GAP status 1 and 2 in the map on the right, it begins to paint a clearer picture. Here, we can see that approximately 22% of California is protected to that level. In this example, that means that we've got about 8% to go to hit the 30 by 30 target, and it's worth stressing that the state and its many partners are working to establish this baseline as we speak. The question becomes, how can California identify the best places to protect and close this gap? The answer is CA Nature, as the resource agency affectionately calls it. CA Nature is an integrated suite of mapping and visualization tools that use authoritative data to display, prioritize, and track the state's biodiversity, climate, and access efforts towards achieving 30 by 30. ESRI's geospatial infrastructure powers this CA Nature platform. Our project implementation of CA Nature is comprised of 5 main pillars of activity. Starting in the upper left, the foundation of it all is the GIS, or the environment for modeling and synthesizing the state's best science. Moving around to the right is the best available data, or unlocking silos of content and daylighting them to be utilized in this effort. Next is planning applications, which are a major component of what we're helping the state build. They include things like data exploration apps, focused planning apps for identifying conservation opportunity, and monitoring dashboards to track progress over time. Next is capacity building, or engaging with our peers throughout government agencies to equip them with the skills needed to effectively maintain, administer, and grow this system in the future. And finally, the heart of the entire effort, the outwardly facing hub site, which serves as the state's communicative vehicle through which Californians gain access to these resources. Let's dive a little deeper into the conceptual design of CA Nature. Starting on the left is the content, or the potential source data that's feeding it all. We're working with our friends at the state to identify the best available data for this effort. Moving to the right, this data is then leveraged for analytics and modeling, populating the Open Data Portal and streamed into applications for additional context. Starting in the middle, the Open Data Portal is envisioned to have data organized via the three main themes driving 30 by 30 in California: biodiversity, climate, and equity. Similarly, this is also where additional information such as statewide and regional threats data and the all-important protected areas database will reside. Moving to the top, this content will then feed a suite of applications for actively supporting conservation planning and tracking progress. Moving to the right, these tools will be made available to local governments and groups throughout the state to use in guiding their local decisions about what lands to protect. As entities take planning and conservation action, their newly protected lands will be included in the protected areas database in the center, and again summarized by dashboards at the top to track progress over time, thereby creating an integrated system for achieving 30 by 30. Our project is in the early stages, but let's take a quick look at some of our successes to date. First is the publicly facing hub site that we introduced earlier. The site went live a couple of months ago and continues to grow as the state's program is being built out. Of note is that the site is also being used for public engagement, helping citizens find up-to-date information, connect with regional and topical workshops, and providing a series of Survey 123 questionnaires soliciting conservation priorities and potential data from stakeholders. As more content becomes available, this hub site will continue to be updated with the latest information and resources. ArcGIS is also being used to help support regional workshops throughout the state. As shown here, agency staff are creating summary maps and graphics depicting key characteristics of each state region to help set the context for the effort. These GIS artifacts will also help inform the Pathways to 30 by 30 document that the state is preparing. Next, here are a few quick highlights of the things that are coming up. First is the open data component of the hub site. This is underway as the statewide authoritative datasets are being collected and prepared. Of note, we're also using the newly released ArcGIS image to make available image services of the climate data and other raster datasets. We are also actively developing our first tier of applications related to data exploration. These Explorer apps will be made for multiple different data categories, including biodiversity, climate, equity, and protected lands. The sample app shown here is our early version of the CA Nature Biodiversity Explorer. It's being used to daylight the state's biodiversity data in new ways, such as with summary histograms that allow users to contextually view multiple variables and detect areas of desirable characteristics. In the words of Deputy Director of the Data and Technology Division at California Department of Fish and Wildlife, "This is really cool. I've never seen our data this way." Now, Data Explorer apps such as this one are only the start. In the months ahead, we'll be working to develop the second-tier planning and prioritization apps that will synthesize this content and help to support conservation action. As we're building out CA Nature, we're purposefully thinking about how this effort can be leveraged, potentially templatized, and repeated elsewhere. And this is very important because, like we pointed out in the beginning, this movement is gaining momentum, and CA Nature will likely be the first of many local, state, and federal efforts to come. Revisiting the 5 pillars of our project, we begin to see the completed tasks filled in around various components of the geospatial infrastructure. Stepping back once again to the big picture, CA Nature is envisioned as a system and suite of tools which bridge the best available science, rigorous engagement with the public, and an iterative and adaptive conservation planning process to facilitate the goal of conserving 30 by 30. With that, thank you all for the chance to share this exciting project, and I'll go ahead and pass this back to David to wrap the session up.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks to my colleagues for contributing today. As you can clearly see, 30 by 30 is an important initiative which could not come at a more critical time in human history. Just beginning to wrap our arms around the opportunities and challenges ahead for these initiatives, the examples you've seen today are equally applicable to current green infrastructure planning, conservation planning programs, as well as the road ahead for 30 by 30. We view these efforts as complementary and interchangeable and see GIS as a fundamental contributor to all conservation planning activities. We look forward to both learning with you and contributing to your 30 by 30 efforts as we work to simplify and streamline the application of ArcGIS for ultimately achieving 30 by 30 at scale. As we embark on this journey together, your feedback is extremely important. If you could please complete the survey for the session, it would be greatly appreciated. Let me go ahead and pass the session over to our moderator for the Q&A and the wrap-up. Thank you.